Picture this, right? You're sitting in this dimly lit, completely packed concert hall in early 19th century Vienna.
Oh, yeah. The energy in the room would be electric.
Exactly. And the pianist on stage is just absolutely hammering the keys, like
Yeah.
unleashing this terrifying, stormy, emotionally devastating wave of sound.
Right. It feels like the musical equivalent of a total psychological breakdown.
Yes. But here is the crazy part. If you actually look at the sheet music, every single measure
Yeah.
is constructed with like the mathematical precision of a master watchmaker.
Nothing is out of place.
Nothing. There's all this furious rage, but it is entirely trapped inside a perfectly symmetrical, unbreakable cage.
And I mean, that paradox right there, that is the absolute heart of the era we are examining today.
It really is.
We are looking at a period where composers figured out how to channel the absolute most profound depths of the human experience,
Right.
but doing it through the most rigorous logical structures ever created in Western music.
And if you're listening to this, you are an RCM grade 10 student prepping for your history examination.
Welcome to the study session.
Yeah, welcome. You probably have your study guide for the classical era right in front of you. That's roughly 1750 to 1820.
And you've got 3 Titan composers on your list: Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven, plus 6 specific study works.
But listen, for this deep dive, we are throwing out the traditional flashcards. We are not just going to like sit here and memorize dates and dry definitions.
No, because we have one crucial rule for this deep dive, and it's so important. We are going to focus on hearing the music in our minds first.
Sound before vocabulary.
Exactly. We need to understand what it sounds like and, maybe more importantly, why it sounds that way. And we do that before we slap an RCM vocabulary label on it.
Because once you hear it, the terminology just naturally follows the sound.
It does. So make sure you have your assigned listening examples ready. Pause us, play the track, and actively listen for the mechanics that we're talking about as we go.
Okay, so let's set the stage. Before we get into those heavy hitters, we have to look at the world they were actually living in. Because the classical era doesn't just, happen in a vacuum.
Right. It is the direct musical result of the Age of Enlightenment.
Which was this massive societal shift.
Huge. I mean, the Enlightenment prioritized reason, education, science. It was this widespread belief that logical structure could actually improve human society.
So we're moving away from, the absolute rule of monarchs and shifting toward the celebration of human intellect.
Exactly. And Vienna becomes this bustling epicenter of this new world. Public concerts start to really boom.
Which is a big deal, right? Expanding the audience way beyond just this super rich aristocracy.
It fundamentally changes the objective of the music.
Yeah.
Because in the preceding Baroque period, the ideal was this heavy, elaborate polyphony.
Right. Multiple independent melodies just weaving around each other constantly.
So if the Baroque period was, a beautiful but wildly overgrown, tangled, chaotic forest.
Then the classical era becomes a perfectly manicured, symmetrical hedge maze.
Yes, that is the perfect analogy. That manicured hedge maze is all about clarity. Composers are shedding all that heavy Baroque ornamentation.
They want elegant, balanced phrases, usually organized into very predictable, 4 or 8 measure groupings.
Right. They want a clear, single melody supported by a subordinate accompaniment. And they want expressive emotion, sure, but it has to be highly controlled.
Highly controlled. So I want you to keep that image of the manicured hedge maze in your mind as we bring in our first composer, Joseph Haydn.
Ah, Haydn. If the Enlightenment was about establishing logical structures, Haydn was the master architect.
He laid down the foundational blueprints for how all this new classical music should be built. He didn't just write music, he basically standardized the forms.
He really did. And to see those blueprints in action, we should turn to your first study work, which is Haydn's Symphony No. 104, the London Symphony.
So when you listen to the first movement of the London Symphony, you aren't just hearing a collection of nice melodies.
No, you are hearing a highly deliberate 3-part psychological journey.
Okay, let's break that journey down. First, the orchestra sets the scene. They introduce the main musical ideas in the home key.
Which establishes a real sense of stability and order.
Right. And this brings us to our first major piece of RCM terminology, that initial presentation of ideas. That is the exposition.
the exposition. But, order can only keep our attention for so long.
Right. Eventually, the music has to, like, wander off into the maze.
Exactly. So the orchestra takes those original ideas and just starts tearing them apart. The harmonies become unstable,
They start moving through all these distant, unpredictable keys.
and the themes are fragmented. They get tossed around different sections of the orchestra, and the tension just constantly builds.
And we call that central chaotic section the development.
Because the composer is literally developing or manipulating the core material to create dramatic conflict.
And just when you feel entirely lost in that harmonic wilderness.
The composer brings you safely back home. The original themes return, fully intact, and they resolve all that built-up tension back in the original home key.
That satisfying return is the recapitulation.
So we have exposition, development, recapitulation. That three-part mechanism is sonata form.
Sonata form. It is the engine that drives almost every first movement of a symphony or concerto or string quartet in this entire era.
It's everywhere.
But wait, I had to ask a question about Haydn's specific use of it in the London Symphony. Because in his exposition, he uses what's called a monothematic approach.
Right, monothematic exposition.
Yeah, so instead of giving us two completely contrasting musical themes to create tension, he basically just gives us one main idea and then plays it again in a different key.
He does.
Isn't that like a stand-up comedian doing a whole hour on a single joke?
Yeah.
How does he keep the audience from getting totally bored?
It's a fair question. But he keeps them engaged by making the delivery of that single idea absolutely spectacular.
It's all in the delivery.
Exactly. And he achieves that through his absolute mastery of orchestration, which was heavily influenced by the innovations of the Mannheim School.
The Mannheim School. We need to define that.
Right. So the Mannheim Orchestra over in Germany had completely revolutionized instrumental playing. They introduced strict, unified bowing for the strings.
So they all looked and sounded perfectly in sync.
Yes. And they pioneered these dramatic, synchronized, dynamic contrasts, the famous Mannheim crescendo.
Where the entire orchestra would seamlessly swell from a whisper to an absolute roar.
So Haydn takes his one joke, his single theme, and he dresses it up with these Mannheim effects.
He changes the instrumentation, he plays with the dynamic extremes, he reharmonizes it.
The underlying architecture remains exactly the same, but the sonic texture is constantly shifting.
That's brilliant. I highly recommend pausing here to listen to that first movement. Listen specifically for how much mileage Haydn gets out of that single melodic idea just by changing the volume in the instruments.
It really is a masterclass in variation. But, Haydn didn't just apply this structural genius to instrumental music.
Right, he brought it to vocal music as well. Which brings us to your second study work, Haydn's The Creation.
Now, this is a massive vocal work. It details the biblical story of the world's creation. You have a huge chorus, vocal soloists, and a full orchestra.
But nobody's wearing costumes, right? There are no painted sets. Nobody is acting out the scenes on a stage.
Right, so what you were describing is an oratorio. It delivers all the narrative drama of an opera, but you do it in a concert setting.
And the big innovation to listen for here is how Haydn utilizes the orchestra to drive that narrative.
Yes, because in previous generations, when a singer was delivering plot details, the orchestra would just play a polite, sustained chord in the background, just sort of staying out of the way.
But Haydn uses recitativo accompagnato.
Exactly. The orchestra actively participates in the storytelling.
They basically become a character.
They do. When the vocal soloist sings about a heavy snowfall or like a roaring tiger, the orchestra doesn't just sit there. The strings will physically mimic the swirling snow with these rapid descending scales.
Or the brass will emulate the roar of the beast.
Right. And the RCM term for this is word painting. The music literally illustrates the text. The orchestra is no longer just a backup band, it is an active participant in the drama.
Which provides a perfect bridge to Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart.
Ah, Mozart.
So Haydn established the structures. He built the beautiful symmetrical hedge maze of the symphony and the sonata. But the Enlightenment wasn't just about cold mathematical logic.
No, not at all. It was deeply interested in human psychology, individuality, and social interaction.
And Mozart took Haydn's rigid structures and injected them with brilliant, fluid, sophisticated human conversation.
Mozart possessed an almost supernatural understanding of human interaction, and you can hear it so clearly in his instrumental music. Let's look at your third study work, Mozart's Piano Concerto No. 17.
Okay, a concerto, which is all about the relationship between the individual and the collective.
Exactly. Let's apply our rule. When you hit play on the first movement, you don't hear the piano right away.
Right. The orchestra plays entirely on its own for several minutes. They lay out all the primary musical themes in the tonic key.
It's like the collective society stating its generalized worldview.
I love that. Then, the solo piano finally enters, and it plays those exact same themes, but it adds its own ornamentation. It modulates to a new key. It asserts its individuality.
And the mechanism you were describing there is the double exposition.
Double exposition.
Right. Unlike a standard symphony where the exposition happens once, the concerto exposition happens twice. First for the orchestra alone, and then again for the soloist accompanied by the orchestra.
Which creates an immediate psychological distinction between the mass of the orchestra and the singular voice of the piano.
And they're having a deeply respectful conversation. The piano and the orchestra aren't shouting over each other.
It's like a great podcast interview. They pass the mic back and forth, they pass the melodic lines back and forth, they elaborate on each other's thoughts, all while maintaining perfect clarity.
But if we really want to talk about Mozart's mastery of psychology, we have to look at the stage. Your next study work is The Marriage of Figaro,
Which is an opera buffa, or a comic opera.
the blockbuster entertainment of the 18th century.
But opera buffa was a real departure from the serious operas of the past, wasn't it?
Yeah.
The old ones were obsessed with ancient gods and mythological heroes.
Right, opera seria. But Figaro is about everyday people. It's servants outsmarting their masters, mistaken identities, relatable romantic anxiety.
It's real, messy human drama.
And this is where Mozart's genius for musical characterization really shines. Let's look at the mechanics of the terzetto.
That's a three-person ensemble.
Right. So in a spoken stage play, if three actors stand on stage and yell three entirely different sentences at the exact same time, the audience just hears unintelligible noise.
Yeah, it's just chaos.
But in an opera, Mozart can make it mathematically perfect and emotionally thrilling.
So how exactly does he pull that off without it turning into a chaotic wall of sound?
He manipulates the musical elements so they stay distinct. Like, say, one character is panicking, right? Mozart gives them these rapid, breathless eighth notes.
Oh, like they're literally hyperventilating.
Exactly. But then a second character is furious. Maybe they're noble, so they get these long, sweeping, sustained phrases over top of that.
And the third character?
Maybe they're quietly scheming, so they get staccato, detached quarter notes. He assigns them completely different rhythmic values and places them in completely different vocal registers, like a high soprano, a mid-range tenor, a low bass.
So they sing simultaneously. Their melodies interlock to form complementary chords, but because their rhythms and registers are totally distinct.
You can hear every single character's psychological state perfectly clearly.
That is just an incredible feat of engineering. And speaking of characterization, as the plot unfolds and the emotional temperature on stage changes, the music has to adapt, right?
It has to.
Like, if a character starts an aria feeling calm and ends it in an absolute rage, the structure has to accommodate that shift.
Which brings us to modified strophic form.
Okay, let's define that. Strophic form simply means taking a single melody and repeating it over and over for each new verse of text.
Like a standard hymn or a folk song.
Right. But a strict repetition doesn't work for evolving theatrical drama.
No, it would be boring. So Mozart modifies it. He keeps the recognizable melodic framework so the audience feels grounded, but he alters the tempo, or he changes the orchestration, or shifts the harmony.
All to perfectly match the shifting psychological state of the character on stage.
Exactly. And while we're talking about Figaro, we should probably touch on the trouser roll.
Yes, such a specific and fun tradition of this era.
The trouser roll, or the pants roll, is a male character, typically a very young, impulsive, hormonally charged teenage boy, but it is intentionally sung by a female singer, usually a mezzo-soprano.
Right, and it isn't just a sight gag.
No, it provides a very unique vocal tone color. It's lighter and more buoyant than a mature adult male voice, so it perfectly captures the awkward, breathless energy of adolescence.
Okay, so let's recap for a second. We have Haydn, the structural architect who established the rules of the symphony and sonata form. We have Mozart, the master psychologist, who used those rules to create breathtaking musical conversations and theatrical realism.
And then we have Ludwig van Beethoven.
Beethoven. He is so often painted as the great disruptor, right? The guy who basically tore down the classical era.
People love to say that. But if you look at his music, especially his early and middle periods, he inherited the exact same blueprints.
He used sonata form. He He used symmetrical phrases.
He didn't tear down the manicured hedge maze, he just started running through it with a torch.
I love that. Let's listen to how he does that. Your fifth study work is Beethoven's Piano Sonata. Number 8, the Pathétique.
Such a famous piece.
When you get to the final movement, you hear this very urgent, memorable melody. Then the music wanders off into a completely different contrasting section.
But eventually, that main theme cycles back.
Right, and then it wanders off into yet another new idea, and then boom, the familiar main theme returns again.
So what you were describing there is rondo form.
Rondo form.
The fundamental principle of a rondo is a recurring main theme. We call that the A section that alternates with contrasting episodes. So B, C, D, and so on.
It creates a really strong sense of inevitability.
It does. The listener always knows that no matter how far the music strays, it will eventually snap back to that familiar home base.
I want to challenge you on something here,
Wait.
though.
Okay, let's hear it.
You said Beethoven didn't tear down the classical era, but the Pathétique Sonata is famous for its extreme emotional intensity. There are these massive, heavy chords, violent dynamic shifts, and this brooding, stormy atmosphere.
Yeah, it's intense.
If a classical era is all about controlled emotion and elegance, why isn't this piece just classified as a full-blown romantic era breakdown?
It's a great question, but look closer at the score. Does an emotional breakdown have perfectly symmetrical 8-bar phrases?
Well,
Does a total loss of control neatly alternate between an A section and a B section in a textbook rondo form?
I guess not.
No. Beethoven is raging, absolutely, but he is raging inside the cage that Haydn built. That is the defining tension of Beethoven's music.
He takes the classical balloon and fills it with an unprecedented amount of psychological pressure.
Yes. He stretches the rubber to its absolute breaking point, but he doesn't let it pop. The strict structural boundaries are what make the emotional violence so powerful.
So the structure actually holds the chaos in check.
Exactly. But, as Beethoven aged, and particularly as he lost his hearing, his relationship with those structures fundamentally changed.
Which brings us to your final study work. His string quartet in C-sharp minor, Opus 131.
We are moving from the grand public statement of a symphony to chamber music.
Chamber music, originally intended for small, intimate rooms, right? Not massive concert halls.
Right. A string quartet consists of 2 violins, a viola, and a cello. During Haydn and Mozart's time, the string quartet was basically the ultimate expression of polite, civilized conversation among equals.
But by the time Beethoven writes Opus 131, he is completely deaf, and he is nearing the very end of his life.
So the conversation changes. It's no longer a polite chat in a parlor. When you listen to this quartet, it feels incredibly demanding. You really have to lean in.
It feels like you are eavesdropping on a private, late-night, desperately intense confession between 4 people who are finishing each other's sentences.
It is radically introspective. And structurally, Beethoven finally starts breaking the mold from the inside out.
Right, because a traditional classical string quartet has 4 distinct movements, like 4 separate chapters in a book.
But Opus 131 has 7 movements, and they are played continuously without a single break.
The music just flows from a slow, agonizing fugue directly into a frantic dance and then into a lyrical set of variations.
He essentially abandons the standard blueprints.
Or it transcends them.
Yeah, transcends them is a better word. Furthermore, the way he treats the instruments changes completely. In earlier classical music, the first violin usually gets the flashy melody, while the cello just provides a basic bass line.
But in Opus 131, there is absolute equality of voice leading.
The melody is fractured and passed constantly between all 4 instruments. The cello is just as likely to carry the emotional weight as the first violin.
It is a dense, unified, psychological exploration that paves the way directly for the Romantic era.
It really does. So let's pull the camera all the way back and synthesize this for the exam.
Because the goal here is to see the classical era not as a list of isolated facts on flashcards, but as a flowing evolution.
Exactly. Connect the dots between your study works. Compare the massive public scale of Haydn's London Symphony with the intense private intimacy of Beethoven's string quartet.
Compare the narrative storytelling of Haydn's The Creation, where the orchestra literally paints the text,
to the realistic psychological human drama of Mozart's Marriage of Figaro, where the terzetto allows multiple characters to sing different thoughts simultaneously without overlapping into chaos.
You want to hear the structural wit of Haydn, the effortless conversational elegance of Mozart's double exposition, and the boundary-pushing heavy drama of Beethoven's rondo form.
So as an RCM Grade 10 student, here is the checklist you need to keep in mind when listening to any piece from this era.
Get your pens ready.
Listen for the symmetry. those balanced, even phrases. Listen for clarity of texture, usually a single melody with a supporting accompaniment.
Notice the use of gradual dynamic changes, thanks to the Mannheim School.
Identify the architectural forms like sonata form and rondo. And above all, listen for that delicate balance. Expressive emotion held firmly in check by logical structure.
And remember where it sits in history. It evolved out of the dense, highly ornate, tangled garden of the Baroque period,
It settled into the balanced, logical, manicured hedge maze of the Enlightenment.
and then largely due to Beethoven stretching those architectural boundaries to their absolute limit, it pointed directly toward the deeply personal, rule-breaking emotion of the Romantic era that was just around the corner.
It is a continuous passing of the torch. Beethoven revered Mozart. Mozart deeply respected Haydn. They learned the rules from each other, mastered them, and then figured out how to bend them to say something new.
If you've been pausing and listening along, you've done the hard work. Remember, true mastery of this era for your exam doesn't come from memorizing a definition of sonata form on a piece of paper.
Definitely not.
It comes from being able to hear the exposition, development, and recapitulation by ear, and understanding why the composer chose to build the piece that way.
Which leaves us with one final puzzle for you to ponder on your own time.
Oh, I love a good puzzle to end on.
We have established that the Enlightenment was obsessed with order, logic, and scientific structure.
The blueprints of the maze.
Right. But when you listen to the heartbreaking, tender moments in a Mozart concerto or the fiery, storming passion in a Beethoven sonata, why does this highly structured, mathematically precise music still have the power to absolutely devastate us today?
Does a perfectly symmetrical hedge maze have a soul?
That's the question. Can strict rules, mathematical precision, and rigid architectural boundaries actually create more freedom for genuine, overwhelming human expression?
Wow. It is a beautiful paradox to take with you into your exam. You have the tools, you have the historical context, and most importantly, you have the sound in your ears.
You are going to do great.
Good luck on your RCM Grade 10 history examination, and keep listening closely.